Two Nikka distilleries, Yoichi and Miyagikyo. Who wins? Find out as we put them head to head. Welcome to Kanpai Planet, bringing you the world of Japanese drinks direct from the heart of Tokyo. I'm Mac, and today we're pitting Nikka's first two distilleries against each other by reviewing single malt Yoichi and single malt Miyagikyo. First two, you say? Surely you mean only two? Well, stick around to the end, where I will tease a teaser for Nikka fans, or skip ahead, whatever floats your boat. These bottles were released in the aftermath of the 2015 Nikka Age-mageddon. The Age-mageddon saw a massive restructuring of Nikka's lineup. That's when Nikka discontinued their entire Yoichi and Miyagikyo range of the time. The 10-year, the 12-year, the 15-year, the 20-year, even the no age statement version which existed back then, all gone. And it was these no age statement bottles which replaced them. Both these bottles reflect a range of single malt expressions from each distillery. They both come in tinted 700ml bottles, and the labels feature a nice picture of the distillery where the juice is made, as well as kanji for the names. They're both 45% ABV and both have added colour. What's interesting is that they have coloured them almost identically. The Miyagikyo is a little bit darker. In Japan, the RRP of these whiskies is 4,620 yen after tax each, which is about $40 US. Interestingly, both of them are easier to find on shelves than the Taketsuru Pure Malt blend. In fact, for the last couple of years, this has been much more available than the Yoichi, but that has started to change recently for the better. You'll be pleased to know that both of these bottlings meet the requirements to be called Japanese whiskey under the new standards launched in February 2021 by the Japan Spirits and Liqueur Makers Association. So, let's start with the Yoichi. I have absolutely no doubt that you have all watched my video pitting the old and new versions of Nikka's Taketsuru Pure Malt blend head to head, and so you all know about the life of Masataka Taketsuru, the founder of Nikka, and the early history of Nikka Whisky. That history began in earnest in 1934 when the Yoichi distillery was built in the town of the same name in Hokkaido, Japan's northernmost main island, fulfilling Taketsuru's vision to build the distillery in Japan in a place with conditions similar to Scotland. They use 100% malted barley, and it's a peated malt. For their pot stills, they use direct coal-fired distillation, so I expect that to impart a smoky character to the dram. The main influence during maturation has come from new American oak casks and ex-sherry casks. And the warehouses where this is aged are close to the Ishikari Bay, so I expect there to be a salty, briny character imparted. I've just outlined the distiller's intent, but how are those intentions going to materialize in the whiskey itself? Let's find out. On the nose. The nose is reasonably pronounced. There are some smoky notes, some peaty notes, and some briny notes, which we expected given the methodology I outlined earlier. That's accompanied by some lemon, some unripe banana, some vanilla, and a bit of cinnamon. There's some sugar, and there's some mint, and those salty, smoky, peaty characteristics amp up as you spend more time nosing the dram. Interesting, some notes in here do remind me of Springbank, a bit of olive oil and a bit of sandalwood. Let's palate. Okay, that peat hits you much more on the palate. Still mild, but pretty pervasive. There is fruit there, that citrus, that lemon I mentioned earlier, also that green bananas there on the palate, and also a bit of melon. I'm also getting some earthiness combined with some malt. And the overall mouthfeel, it's lightly oily. There is also some saltiness and brine. The palate reminds me a bit of an Auburn 14. The finish is medium. Some citrus, some peat, and some salinity. So what's the verdict? Well, you can definitely taste the Scottish influence in the dram, but it's definitely a Japanese whiskey. Perhaps the greatest triumph of this whiskey is that it does meet that distiller's intent that I mentioned earlier. If you're a fan of lightly peated Scottish malts, then you're going to love this dram. This is the part where YouTubers normally ask you to like, comment, subscribe, and share these videos. And as we examine the output of these historic distilleries, it would be rude not to keep up that tradition. On to single malt Miyagikyo. Now, this bottle allows us to talk about the next major evolution in Nikka history. Due to the adversarial nature of the origins of Japanese whiskey, distilleries haven't swapped stocks like they do in Scotland. Now things are starting to change on that front, but back in the 1960s, when Taketsuru wanted to make his blends more complex, he had two choices: import more whiskey or build another distillery. The dream, of course, was always the latter. In 1967, he was exploring Miyagi in the northern part of Honshu, the main island of Japan. He came across a valley at the junction of two rivers. He tried the water from one of the rivers and was so impressed that he built his second distillery there. And the fact that the river was called the Nikka must have sealed the deal. The Miyagikyo distillery began operations in 1969 and has undergone various expansions since then. It's not just different terroir, but also different distillation methodologies that create the distinctive Miyagikyo whiskies. Miyagikyo's pot stills are larger than those at Yoichi, with different shapes, such as ascending line arm, which tends to create a lighter distillate. These pot stills are heated by indirect steam at a much lower temperature, and this slower distillation tends to result in softer characteristics too. They even use distinctive yeasts to generate a more aromatic aroma. In the main, this uses unpeated malt, but there is peated malt in there. Again, the main influence for maturation comes from ex-sherry casks and new American oak casks. Let's go on the nose. First up, you've got a lot of notes that you'd associate with malt. So caramel, fudge, vanilla. It's also quite floral and oaky. There's some fresh fruit in here as well. But the thing that's surprising is that there is a lot of smoke relative to what you might have expected. It gets amped up on the nose, you focus on it. Overall, it's very inviting me to go on the palate. There's actually surprisingly thick structure to the Miyagikyo. You got some hints of it on the nose, but this really is a multifaceted dram. Firm and lively. It is spicy, it is malty, it is herbaceous, it is fantastic. I'm getting some ginger, and I'm getting a bit of tobacco. You know, it doesn't coat your mouth in the same way that the Yoichi does. A little bit more delicate on the mouthfeel. Despite all that going on the palate, the finish is actually medium and pretty soft, allowing you to enjoy some of the more mellow characteristics of the dram. For example, baked apples or vanilla, or some floral notes such as rose. Overall, this is a classic old school single malt that harks back to a simpler time. I actually thought the whiskey world had forgotten how to produce drinks like these in the age of single casks and bold finishes. So, head to head, it's a tough one. The Yoichi has got that peat, that saltiness, that fruit. The Miyagikyo, all that complexity reminding me of a classic lowland single malt. Both of them are better than the no age statement whiskies from the respective distilleries that they replaced. I actually think that the distiller's intent I talked about earlier has been better met by the Yoichi, but this Miyagikyo is so hard to pin down, so interesting, that I'm going to have to give it to this guy. Should you buy them? Well, at the RRP in Japan of 4,620 yen, absolutely. They're a great one to go back to for locals and a must buy if you're visiting here. Overseas, I've seen them for double that or triple or even more. So I'd say pick up a bottle if you really want to try them at up to $80 US, 60 euros or 50 British pounds. Beyond that, well, you know, there's a lot of great stuff out there. As for Nikka's potential future plans I teased at the start, well, Nikka Whisky acquired the Satsuma Tsukasa distillery in 2017. It's in Kagoshima, which is famous for sweet potato shochu. They applied for a whiskey distillation license in January 2018. With some fantastic whiskies coming out of warmer climates such as India and Taiwan, as well as from Kagoshima itself, made by Mars and Kanosuke, we may well see whiskey from Satsuma Tsukasa in the not too distant future. Single malt Yoichi and Miyagikyo are great whiskies at a great price. Now Nikka, please bring back the age statements. Until next time, Kanpai!